Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Meiser Sheni, Pei Gimel Halacha Beis. We're learning today Daf Chav Dalid, and we left off on Daf Chav Dalid all the way on the top, mamash on top of the Amid. Quickly recapping, we have Rab Shimon in the Mishnah, who allows one to use Meiser Sheni money to buy Truma. And then we have a Machlokes Amoraim, exactly what is the leniency and where is the leniency of Rab Shimon. Rabbi Yossi holds, the way we learned the Mishnah, the way we read the Marafulda in the Mishnah, that Rab Shimon holds that you are allowed to be Meviyim Kachim Lebeis Absul, as we explained yesterday. Rabbi Yoina had a Chiddush. Rabbi Yoina says, yeah, Rab Shimon is lenient, but only where does he say that you are allowed to bring Kachim Lebeis Absul? Only by Truma, because since Kohanim are Zerizim, we are not concerned that the additional limitations that you are placing on the Meiser Sheni by making it also into Truma will somehow lead to a scenario where the Meiser Sheni won't be consumed. It will always be consumed. Kohanim are Zerizim. In other scenarios where it's not about Kahuna, like buying Shvi'is product with Mo'is Meiser Sheni, the Amoira Rabbi Yoina holds that even Rab Shimon will agree with the Braisa that we learned. The Braisa was unanimous that you're not allowed to do that. Problem we had, and that's where we left off, is that we have a Mishnah in Pesachim that's speaking about a Pesach and a Bechor that got intermingled, and Rab Shimon is the one that says that you can actually bring it. Obviously, each one of these two animals are going to be more limited because you have to apply to each one the stringencies, both of Bechor and of Pesach. Now, I know that we spoke out that for that to be allowed, it must be that the Bnei HaChabura were Kohanim. It has to be that way, because each animal that they're eating might be a Bechor. A Bechor is only to be eaten by Kohanim. But that's not so easily linked with Kohanim Zerizim. It's not. Why not? I want to say something that we didn't say yesterday. That the Gemara's question is based on a premise that where do we presume that Kohanim, let's say, are very diligent, they're very Zerizim? That's only in regard to matters that was entrusted to them because of their kahuna, which is eating truma. Eating truma is something unique because of a kohen. And the Gemara is saying that we will not apply it to a carbon pesach. In other words, even though they happen to be kohanim zerizim doesn't mean that everything a kohen does is gavaldically done diligently. No. Concerning matters of kahuna, they're diligent. That's a big difference. That's why the Gemara's kasha was l'chura a bomb question. And I'll say by heart, the answer will be that just like we say kohanim zerizim, the same is said regarding Korban Pesach, even for Yisraelim or for kohanim. In Bavli, the expression is that b'nei chabura zerizim hein. The Gemara here won't use those words. But don't forget, guys, like we said yesterday, Korban Pesach has the most limited amount of eating time. Certainly with the Rabbanan. You can only begin eating it at night. And we already know the emes. It's not stam at night. You have to daven maidev. You have to make a seder. You have to say the magid. It's mamash limited. No other korban has such a little limitation. Doesn't matter. Pesach is unique. B'nei chabura zerizim. So that will be the answer that we will give, not to refute Rabbi Yoina. Okay, that will be just a closing of yesterday's sugya. Today is Gavaldik Chais. Let me just say the following. That we mentioned on occasion that when a person redeems their Meiser Sheni, if the original owner is the one that's doing it, he has to add a fifth. Put this on the side for a second. Let's, Hashgacha Pratis, this week we're learning this in Iyar, Tavshin Peivav. This week is the Parshios of Bahar and Bechukoisai. In Parshas Bechukoisai, there is the general rule, explicit in the Torah, that whoever was Magdish, an item to the Beis HaMikdash, makes no difference whether to the Bedek HaBayis or even a Korban, Kedushas Mizbeach, Kedushas Haguf. If that item is going to be redeemed by the one who consecrated it, by its original owner, that person has to add a Chaimish. Without getting into the details. It's really the chaimish is not 20%. Really, the chaimish is what we would call in Goyish 25%. It doesn't matter. Chaimish. Okay. So that's in the Torah. Rabbi Shua ben Levi comes with a big novelty. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, "Ein moisifin chaimish ela al tchilas hegdeshois, which means there is the primary sanctified item and there is the secondary sanctified item, which means if I'm magdish an animal, I'll give you an example, to be a shlamim, and then the animal became blemished. That's a case where the animal has to be redeemed. Yeah, if the original owner redeems that animal, he has to add a fifth to its value. And he does that. Now, with this money, he's going to buy another carbon shlamim. What happens if the second carbon shlamim gets blemished? So Rabbi Shimon Levi says there, the original owner does not add a chaimish. The din of adding a chaimish is only al tchilas hegdeshois and not on the secondary hegdeshois. Wonderful. Okay, first of all, it's wonderful to know that. But now Rab Shmuel is going to tell you two dinim. And one is more novel than the other. We'll figure out where's the bigger chiddush. But for us, they're both chiddush. Number one, and let me go back to Meiser Sheni. If a person takes Meiser Sheni money and he's going to buy with it a shlamim, and now the shlamim gets blemished, is that shlamim tchilas hegdish or is it secondary hegdish? Because you're not going from chulin to shlamim. The Meiser Sheni itself is something that if the original owner is going to redeem, he's going to have to add a fifth. But he didn't redeem it. He bought a shlamim. Now the shlamim got blemished. Says Rab Shmuel, for the shlamim, you do have to pay the fifth. The shlamim is tchilas hegdish. Another chiddush of Rab Shmuel. Moisar Pesach. We'll speak out more. There's many different ways of coming to surplus of Pesach. One scenario will be, I designated the carbon Pesach, I lost it. Time is late, I designated another carbon Pesach. And I brought it. I found the original. So it's a leftover carbon Pesach. The din is you bring it as a shlamim. What happens if now that it's designated as a shlamim, now it gets blemished. Now I want to redeem it. Again, says Rab Shmuel, don't view this shlamim as secondary, because you can argue you began as a Pesach, now it's already shlamim. Well, if you redeem it, again, you have to add the fifth. And we're going to go into that. That will be the bulk of today's daf. And at the end, we're going to learn one new opener, another big sugya. If shlamim is brought with Meiser Sheni, and the shlamim gets blemished, forget about the chaimish topic. So you redeem it. I want to know what kedusha does the money have? Just as a rule, if I have a produce of Meiser Sheni and I redeem it, the money is imbued with kedushas Meiser Sheni. If I have a shlamim and I redeem it, the animal goes out almost totally lechulin. The blemished animal, I know there's certainly restrictions on it, but the money is imbued with kedusha shlamim. It has to be used to rebuy a shlamim. If Meiser Sheni money was used to buy a shlamim, the Gemara is going to say, if the shlamim gets blemished, and you redeem it, that money only has kedusha shlamim. It has no kedushas Meiser Sheni. Okay, Chavre, this is enough to fabring a whole Shabbos on, but we'll stop with this. This is today's daf, and let's go right inside. Daf Chav Dalet. So we are in the back and forth. So the kasha was Lishitas Rabbi Yoina, Bishitas Rab Shimon, that only by Truma do we say, since Truma is uniquely eaten only by Kohanim Zidizim. Carbon Pesach, even if the Bnei Chabura are Kohanim, but if they're eating it mitzad carbon Pesach, there's no unique reason. That's the premise of the question. And according to Rabbi Yoina, even Rab Shimon will hold that ein meviim kachim lebeis absul. But he allows for us to use both animals, even though both the Bechar and the Pesach will become restricted. So Rav Mana answers, Amar Lei, the answer will be, I agree with you. Kohanim Zerizim is only said when they are eating something only because they're Kohanim, which will be Truma. In other areas, we don't say Kohanim are across the board diligent Zerizim. But just like we say that Kohanim Zerizim, we also say that all of the Jewish people, when it comes to the eating of a carbon Pesach, they are Zerizim. Oichle psachim b'shaitam. When you eat Pesach, to make sure that you fit it into the little Zman, Zerizim hein, all Jews are Zerizim, just like Oichle Truma. And as I said in the Bavli, we have the expression, B'nei Chabura Zerizim hein. Beautiful. And Teidel Chashu Kain, and I'll prove it to you, that all people that eat their carbon Pesach are given this benefit of the doubt that they will be Zadiz. The Taninon, we learned in our Mishnah, in Masechta Shabbos. Now, I just want to remind everyone quickly about the dinim of Shehiyah. What's the din of Shehiyah? Midrabanan Aviv, that if, even though cooking on Shabbos is only prohibited, if I do the cooking on Shabbos, if I light a candle right before Shabbos, if I open the electricity right before Shabbos, I am allowed to benefit from the candle on Shabbos, even though I lit it before. I'm not doing it on Shabbos. Food is different. What's food different? That if food is not fully cooked before Shabbos, let me just add the words, if you don't have a blech. Okay, that's the solution. But before the covering of the fire, the Chachamim says you can't do shehiyah. You can't leave food on the fire if it's not cooked before Shabbos. Why not? Remember the words, Shema yechate b'gecholim. You might stoke the coals. You might play around with the flame. You might do something to make the food get ready better, almost without thinking about it, because it's just the nature of people, especially people in the kitchen. They walk around over there and they stoke the flames. Today, I know we have a gas stove. They didn't have it then. People always needed to stoke the flames. Now, by the way, the Gemara doesn't go into the details, just to quickly review it, because this is halacha l'maisa. Machloikis, in halacha, it comes all the way down. Chananya and the Chachamim. Chananya holds that once the food reached Michael ben Derusoi before Shabbos, then there's no problem of shehiyah. According to the Chachamim, no. And Michael ben Derusoi, we have the Machloikis Rishonim, a third or a half. The Chachamim hold that only if the food is so ready that if you leave it on the fire, it's mitztamek veraloi, only then is there no issue of shehiyah. If it's mitztamek v'yafaloi, that means even if it's ready, but if you leave it on the fire, it gets more ready, then you got a problem. Now, the solution for everyone is just to cover the fire, what we call a blech. Or if you have a crock pot, I don't know why people don't know that, minimally to put a piece of tin foil that is visible, that you can see is sticking out. If not, where's the blech? Some people say you have to cover the knob. But that's the whole topic. So let's go inside over here. The Tanene we learned, ain't soilin basar. Not let a roast, not meat, nor batzal, I don't know why onions are. Wherever you learn, we learn about onions. The whole Zerayim was filled with onions. Ubeitz and an egg. Ella kidei sheyitzoilin mi ba'od yoim. Only if it becomes, let's go with the Chachamim, it has to become fully ready before Shabbos. And don't get nervous. If it's not fully ready, we have a solution. Put a blech. I know that. But that's without a blech. Without covering the ashes, the coals in the oven. Now I got a problem. You know what the problem is? That we see by Korban Pesach, no one had such a restriction. Again, you shecht the Korban Pesach after the Talmud Shel Bein Arbayim. That's when you shecht it. And I know that you're thinking Yontiv. Let's speak about Shabbos. What happens if it's Shabbos? So the din is utaninon, that mishalshelin es pesach letanor, that you can put the Korban Pesach into an oven. Im chashecha means right before nightfall. I'm speaking about where the 14th is Friday. Pesach is Shabbos. So you can't. So put it in the oven right before Shabbos. But hold on. You're putting it in. Now, I know there's something else. That's something that takes many, many, many hours to get ready is also less problematic. But that's not the case over here. There are no restrictions when it comes to the roasting of the Korban Pesach. Why not? Shema yechata b'gecholim. And don't tell me ein shvus b'migdash. This is not part of the avodah. This preparing was done on the harabayis. It was not done inside the azara. I'm talking about after the korban was brought. So is a raya that when it comes to Korban Pesach, people are very careful. No one will be machata b'gecholim because b'nei chaburas it is in him. This is beautiful. Okay, so that closes the sugya that we opened up yesterday. So the machloikes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yoni stands b'shitas Rab Shimon. Okay, now new topic, very much related to Meiser Sheni, and we're going to bring in Meiser Sheni. What's the new topic? That even though the Torah writes in Parshas B'chukoisei, that I look inside the Torah Oir HaShalom, we can read the pasuk that ve'im ba'behema ha'temeya. It's just an example of someone who consecrated an item to the Bedek Habayis, which would be a non-kosher animal is certainly not going to go on the altar. I gave it to the Beis Hamikdash because the Beis Hamikdash will sell it and monetize it. Now, if the one who consecrated it, upada be'erkecha, first of all, you give its value. But if you are the one that was magdishit, if you are the original owner, so the Torah writes, v'yosaf chamishisoi olav, add a halachic fifth, chumsha milabar. Now, if the original owner is not going to be the one that's redeeming it, then they open it up to anyone, and anyone can redeem it, and the other people just pay the value, they don't have to add a fifth. Okay, straightforward. Comes along Rabbi Shua ben Levi, and he says, I want you to know that this law, that the owner has to add the fifth, is only on what he calls tchilas hagdeshois. Ein moisifin choimish, ella al tchilas hagdeshois. If you are redeeming property that falls into the category of primary sanctity, the original sanctity, like in the example that I just gave, the Torah gives an example. I was magdish a behema temeya, and I'm redeeming it, aviv. I have to add a fifth. Now, normally, what were to happen? The money would go into the bank account of the Beis Hamikdash. But let me ask you, what were to happen if I redeemed it not by giving money? I gave another animal that's worth the original plus a fifth. And now that animal has to be redeemed. That animal was not originally consecrated. It became consecrated because it was exchanged for the first animal. Says Rabbi Shua ben Levi, if the original owner is going to now redeem the second animal, he doesn't have to add a fifth. You only have to add a fifth when you redeem that which was tchilas hekdeshos, the original, the primary sanctity, not the secondary sanctity. And I gave an example of the Bedek HaBayis. The same will be by Kedushas Mizbeach. I consecrated an animal to go on the Mizbeach, a shlamim, a oila, whatever. But the animal got blemished. The animal has to be sold, and its value has to be used to buy another animal. Okay, I did that. I redeemed the original animal. I added a fifth. With that, I bought a replacement korban to go on the Mizbeach. The second animal got blemished. Same idea. Even though I'm the original owner, if I'm redeeming it, I don't have to add a fifth. This is important. You only have to add a fifth al tchilas hekdeshos. Now,
for any
korban or bedek habayis. The rule that the original owner has to add a fifth is only if he's redeeming what he calls the primary sanctity, the item that was originally consecrated, not an item that's already a replacement. If I redeem the replacement, which could happen, there I don't have to add a fifth. First of all, where do we know it from? So Amar Rebbe Elazar, the Amoida, the Tani came. First of all, Rabbi Shua ben Levi is an Amoida. But really, he says, I found the Braisa. The Braisa writes that. And the Braisa brings a source. And we just quoted the verse. And it says, V'im babehema hatemeya. Many learned that the limud is from the hay. The trader could have written, V'im babehema temeya. Hatemeya behei hayediya. The animal. What's the animal? So then the trader writes, Upada berkecha. V'yasab chamishisa yalav. So the Braisa, the Tana learns, that when do you have to add a fifth? If it's the one that you consecrated, the primary one, and not the secondary one. Now, I know the pasuk is speaking specifically about bedek habayis, but it makes no difference whether it's a behema temeya, bedek habayis, and you are redeeming it, only primary, not secondary. The same will be, like I said, if you were magdish an animal lamas beach, but it became blemished, and then you redeem it. You have to add a fifth. But if after you redeemed it, you bought a replacement animal, and the second animal got blemished, now again, the same rule, you don't add the fifth. Okay. Now, it says that Rabbi Elazar just says, behema temeya miyuchedes, or I'm sorry, this is the Braisa. Slicha, the Tana says, behema temeya miyuchedes. The example that the Torah gives, that you were magdish, behema temeya. Shehi tchilas hegdish, only there does the Torah say, moisev choimish, af koil. Like we said, koil means not only bedek habayis, even to mizbeach, even if the bedek habayis was something other than an animal, whatever you are magdish. When do you have to add a fifth? Only if you are redeeming the tchilas hegdish, the original that you were magdish. Then are you moisev choimish. Okay. So now the Gemara will quote Rabbi Shmuel Bar Chia, Reb Shmuel, and he's going to tell you 2 dinim. Obviously, there's a need to say it. The premise of the Gemara will be that one wasn't that needed, one was needed. We'll see which one has the bigger novelty. For me, they both are beautiful. They both are a chiddush. So says Rab Shmuel Bar Chia, Bar Yehuda b'shem Rab Chanina. Case number 1, Rab Shmuel number 1. If you have Meiser Sheni, now we learned already in this Masechta that the ideal usage of Meiser Sheni money, the ideal, whether you're obligated, whether it's just a mitzvah, we had that before, is to buy in Yerushalmi an animal for a shlamim. Meiser Sheni, one step that I skipped, I'll say it. Just like Rabbi Shua ben Levi says it for Hekdeshos, it's self-understood. The same is for Meiser Sheni. In Meiser Sheni, the Torah says that if the original owner, if I have produce, I have bananas, the bananas is worth $1. And if I don't want to schlep it to the Beis HaMikdash, so I'm putting it onto money. So the Torah says, I'm not going to give in its place $1. I'm going to give in its place $1.25. $1.25, a fifth millibar. Now, what happens if I take this banana, the 125, and for whatever reason, I put it on something else? I move it. When I move it again, I don't have to add a fifth. You only have to add a fifth al tchilas Meiser Sheni. It's a self-understood. And now we're going to put Meiser Sheni and Hegdish together, which is this case. I had Meiser Sheni money, and I'm using it to buy a shlamim. Shlamim shalakacham b'kesav Meiser Sheni. This animal now, humamu, it had a mum. What do you do with that? You have to redeem it. Now, what would you say? You can think both sides. You can say, 1 second. There was never a carbon. This is the Tchilas Hegdish. You could say that. You can also say, no, this is not Tchilas Hegdish. I know that Kachim has more Kedusha than Meiser Sheni. But the sanctity began when I had money from Meiser Sheni. I redeemed the food onto money. That was the Tchilas Hegdish. Now the money was used to buy a shlamim. Efsher, the shlamim, is considered secondary to the Meiser Sheni. If that would be the case, then when you redeem the shlamim, even if the owner redeems the shlamim, he would not have the fifth. He does add the fifth. That hum upedayan. If you're going to redeem it, if the original owner will redeem it, yes, you'll be Meisev Chaimish. Look, you'll be Meisev Chaimish. Look inside the Marafulda, 7 lines from the bottom. Upedayan Meisev Chaimish. Harei zois hi mitzvah shel Meiser Sheni. We don't view the buying of a carbon shlamim like a secondary. We view it as the primary. Actually, God wants you to buy a shlamim. Even though you are buying it with money that's already holy. We view the shlamim as the beginning of the Hegdish. Din number 1. Din number 2, Rab Shmuel number 2, Rab Shmuel Bar Chia. Same. Bar Yehuda b'shem Rab Chanina. Shlamim shalakachem midmei Pesach. I'll give another example. We gave one example in the intro. We'll give a different example. It's both the same din. If I designated money to buy a carbon Pesach, when I say I, Aviv, I don't mean I, because no one bought a carbon Pesach on their own, because you have to eat it. So let's say we are a group. Chabad Sola bought 10 animals. Whatever the ratio, we have to cheshvan, how much can everyone eat? Okay. And for that, we designated $100. Whatever, just a stamma number. Turned out that we managed to buy the animals needed with $80. That was the value, which means that we originally designated extra money. The way this works by Hegdish is you can't put the money back in your pocket. Once you said this money is for our carbon Pesach, that money is already filled with Kedushas carbon Pesach.
Why?
You don't have to, but we did that. You're very good at it. You don't have to do it that way. But sometimes people do it that way. This money is for once you designated the money, if there is extra money, there is now what would one argue? One can argue, take that money, Aviv, we're Jewish. The mitzvahs are always. Next year, I have to bring a Pesach again. One would think, okay, take the extra $20, put it away in the bank account for next year's carbon Pesach. That's not what happens. What does happen is, we said it even yesterday, that carbon Pesach is viewed as a branch off of Shlamim. Pesach and Shlamim are interrelated. What the din is that I take that money and I buy a shlamim now. Now, how do you view that shlamim? Don't forget, the money was designated for Pesach. Now that you're turning Pesach into Shlamim, one might have argued the Shlamim is like secondary. We don't view it that way. We view the Shlamim as primary, as if you bought a Shlamim in the outset. So here again, Shlamim, Shalakacham Midmei Pesach. Now, obviously, if the animal is going to be offered, there's nothing to talk about. The animal won't be redeemed. But if Humamu, then you have to redeem it. If the original owner was the one Upedayan that redeemed it, here again, Achidish, we view this Shlamim as Tchilas Hegdeshos and not as secondary Hegdeshos. Moisef, Chaimesh. For me, it's beautiful. But comes along Rabbi Yudan and he says, listen here. Thank you, Rabbi Shmuel. One of your two statements, Taka was needed. Rabbi Yudan is saying, I would not have known it without you, but one I didn't need. He's not telling him you didn't have to say it. He's just saying, one is pshita. Chada tzoircha, v'chada lo tzorcha. Now, Rabbi Yudan didn't say which one of the two was a novelty. The Gemara doesn't know it so quick. So that's going to be the topic of what was the chiddush and what's not the chiddush. Amar Rav Mana, we began today's daf with Rav Mana, and we're finishing the Amud with Rav Mana. Amar Rav Mana, I'll tell you the one that's of a greater novelty. Pesach is the greater novelty. The Moisar Pesach that you turned into Shlamim. Without Rab Shmuel, I wouldn't have known that you have to add the Chaimish. I actually would have thought that you don't add the Chaimish. Shlamim, I'm talking about the Shlamim, Maisa Sheni money, I'm going with the Marav Fulda. Since God wants you to use the Maisa Sheni to buy a Shlamim, so it's like that's the mitzvah. It's like that's the Iker mitzvah, the main mitzvah. If it's the main mitzvah, it's not secondary. And since it's the main mitzvah,
more rational that you would have to add the chaimish?
No. Yeah, then you have to add the chaimish. Yeah, because when you begin a process, you have to add the chaimish. It's not a secondary thing. It's the main mitzvah. God says you got to do it. The goal. This is it.
You already added a chaimish when you transferred it to money.
I know that, but since Maisa Sheni money, ideally, should not stam be eaten, it should be used to buy a shlamim. So buying of the shlamim cannot be called something secondary. I get that logic. And that's what Rav Mana, but that's not so simple. Rav Mana is saying that's the case. Pesach tzorcha, shlamim loy tzorcha. 1 second. Daf chav dalad amid beis. Zok the Gemara. Now he's going to tell you what's the big chiddush by Pesach. Without Rab Shmuel, we would have said otherwise. Why would we have said otherwise? Shaloi toimar. You should not say, and this is important, that hoyel uPesach mishtane l'shleim shlamim is kehegdish acher. You changed its designation. It was a Pesach. You made it into a shlamim. I know you are allowed to do it. Making it into something else makes it into something secondary. You were magdish the money for a Pesach. Now it turned out in the example that I just gave, you gave too much money. There was extra money. So now you made it into a shlamim. That is considered something secondary. To you, it was secondary. Actually, you wouldn't have even done it. You wouldn't have even done it if you would have known that the animal in my example would have costed you $80. So the question is, why do you add a fifth? Why do you add a fifth? Why do you add a fifth? And I'll tell you why you add a fifth. Because this shlamim is the first. How was this shlamim the first hegdish? Because the chiddush of Rab Shmuel is that we view the shlamim as a Pesach. Pesach is shlamim. It's part of the original. It is the original.
Why would you add a fifth?
Because whenever you redeem the original, you have to add a fifth. If we were to view it as something new, by the way, the same thing with Maisa Sheni. Maisa Sheni money is meant to be used as a shlamim. That's called original.
I'm having a hard time to understand how Pesach how Shlamim is Pesach, Rabbi. How we feel to do it the same.
That's based on a sugi that we learned in Kachim, that we don't view Pesach as a subcategory in Shlamim. You know, I'll give you an example. It came to me yesterday in the first Mishnah in Zvachim. that normally machshava shaloi lishma, it does damage. To what level depends, right? Chatas complete or at minimum loy olu leba'olam. By Pesach and Shlamim, I think it doesn't do damage, right? I have to remember the Mishnah. Pesach and Shlamim is much easier because it's the same. Pesach and Shlamim is the same. So if it's the same, we can say that this new animal is really part of the Pesach animal. It's part of the original. Okay. That is what Rav Mana says. That's Rav Mana's explanation. Amar Rab Huna, Hamad Shmuel, I agree with you that the Chiddush is Moisar Pesach into Shlamim. But I want to add something that you're not saying, which is there is a din of Tumura. What is the din of Tumura? Really, this is a machlokes Tanoim, and there's a machlokes Amoraim. What do the Tanoim hold? But let me just share in this sugya the shita of Rabbi Yechanan b'shitas the Tana Rab Shimon, which is that if I have an animal designated, let's say, for a shlamim, designated for an oila, and God tells me, don't do a Tumura. Tumura would mean for me to take a chulin animal, equivalent, better, worse, and for me to state that the kedusha of the original should be exchanged onto the new one, that the replacement. God says, don't make such a statement. If you do make such a statement, the statement will be partially effective. What part effective? The new animal becomes imbued with the kedusha of the original one, but the kedusha does not depart the original one. Remember that? Says Rabbi Yechanan, explaining the shita of Rab Shimon, that you can only make a tumura once. If I have a carbon, what did I say? A carbon shlamim, and I put on side of it chulin number 1, and I say this animal should be a tumura of the original. I was over on a lav. Remember that you get malchus. That's one of the 3 exceptions where you get a lav, you get malchus even for a lav she'ein by maisa. Tumura is one of them. Okay, fine. What happens if I take another animal, chulin number 2, and again I violate, God forbid, and I say, may the kedusha of the original go on animal number 2? Says Rabbi Yechanan, understanding the sheet of Reb Shimon, it won't be effective anymore. Animal number 2 will not be holy. What I did is nothing, and I won't get malchus. I didn't affect anything. In other words, you can only make 1 temura from an animal. You can't make more than 1 temura from the original animal. Based on that, says now Rab Huna, explaining the chiddush of Rab Shmuel, that ein ha-pesach oise tmura v'shoina. In other words, Rav Huna holds that Shmuel, first of all, agrees with Rabbi Yechanan's understanding of Rab Shimon, and not only does he hold in that understanding of Rab Shimon, but Rav Huna actually paskins that way. And let's come now, therefore, to a Pesach. That will be his example. If I have an original carbon Pesach, and I make a Tumura, same thing. So the first animal will be called Pesach, even though you can't bring 2 Pesachim. One of them will turn into a Shlamim. That's another case of Moisar Pesach. But if you do it twice, it won't work. So now, even though Ein HaPesach Oisa Tmura Vishoina, if you were to make a Tmura twice, the second Tmura will be ineffective. But what will happen? Hey, Mirboyo than a Pesach. If I made a Tmura when it was a Pesach, Aviv. So one time it worked. Okay? Now let me give you the example I gave in the intro. And then the original animal was lost. We have to bring a carbon Pesach. And we decided to designate a new carbon Pesach. And after we brought the new carbon Pesach, we found the original. What happens with the original? It becomes a shlamim. What happens now if we take this shlamim, this Pesach that got converted into a shlamim, and this genius again makes it into a temura by taking another animal and saying, may the new one be a temura from the shlamim? What do you think would happen? We just said, right, let's go with Rabbi Yechanan in the Tana of Rab Shimon, that you can't make a temura twice from the same original animal. The animal, when it was a Pesach, was made into a temura. Happened once. Now this animal became a shlamim. And now, that if you make a temura when it's a shlamim, it will be effective. What do you see from that halacha? How do we view the shlamim? Is this an extension of the original? No, it's not. If it would be an extension of the original, then the temura would not be effective. This means that mitzad din tumura, this animal is it's a new carbon. Now, did you sanctify this originally? No, you did not. What you sanctified originally was the Pesach. Rabbi Shua Levi is saying that what? That you only have to add a chaimish on tchilas ekdeshos. This is not tchilas ekdeshos. That's the chiddush. No, it's if you were to use the standard that we have when it comes to the dinim of Tumura, then Rab Shmuel never would have been able to say that Meimer Boyo Danu Shlamim. That's a chiddush. That's a huge chiddush. That's why, since he himself, Shmuel himself, will hold that you can use the shlamim as a temura, you can use it from it to make a temura. That's why Rab Shmuel needed to say that if the shlamim gets blemished and you want to redeem it, you have to add a chaimish. That's a big novelty. Now you get what's called a novelty. So he doesn't just go with the general what Rav Mana is saying. No, he's saying it's taka chiddush.
What's the explanation again on it? If it's really looked at
The explanation,
why would you have to add it?
because not all of the dinim travel on the same track.
From the perspective of a chaimish, we look at it as the original animal, but from a perspective of Tamura, we look at it as a new, like a new being.
We look at it as part of the original beginning. For the dinim of a chaimish, yeah. Now, what Rav Huna is saying makes a lot of sense, but Rav Mana will tell him, I'll tell you why I disagree with you. Because Rab Shmuel taught both dinim together. You see, if he only would have taught the din that if you have a moiser pesach into a shlamim, you have v'humamu upedayan, you add a chaimish, you're right. Then you can show, wow. In contrast to the din of Tumura. And how do you explain it? You see, not all of the dinim travel on the same track. In Sadin Tumura, there's one way of analyzing. In Sadinim of adding a chaimish, there's another way of looking at it. The fact that he taught it together, and this whole biur of Tumura is not shayich by the Maisa Sheni that turned into the Shlamim. That's why Rav Mana tells Rav Huna, I reject your understanding. It's not because of this kasha, even though you're making a good point. They have to have the same reason why you would have thought without Rab Shmuel for Maisa Sheni into Shlamim. Without him, you might have thought that you don't have to add a chaimish. The same will be over here. You don't have to go to other dinim. Don't go to other dinim. You just look at this din itself. You could have argued it that way. The first kedusha was the Maisa Sheni. This is the step number 2. First kedusha was a Pesach. Now it became a Shlamim. It can be viewed as something new. And in both, it's not something new. It's an extension of the first. That's Maisa Sheni money was meant for a Shlamim. It's the Tchilas Ekdesh. That's
Just the whole concept.
yes. Yes.
In terms of the way it works, when I have my banana and I change it into money, I add a fifth in, right?
That's
So
right.
$125. Now when I go buy the animal, let's say I have to take that $125, add another fifth and buy a more expensive animal?
For sure not. That's because that's for sure a second Hegdish.
So where
Where
does the fifth on the transference of the money to the animal occurring?
doesn't? When you buy a money animal, it doesn't occur. But what were to happen, let me keep on going. When I redeemed the original, first of all, this pidyon and chilul, I know that what I'm saying now doesn't always fit into the words of everyone, but it's correct to say that the word pidyon generally is used when you go from the original into the money. And the word chilul, just for semantics, is used when you go from the money onto food in Yerushalmi. So Danny, when you're played, you add a fifth. Now, let's say I bought food, just as an example, and the food became tameh. And now the din is that you have to redeem the food. That's where Rabbi Shua ben Levi is saying, this was not the original. This is what came later. You already added the fifth. But every time you have to add a fifth, the banana will turn into 50 bananas. Doesn't work that way. You're not Ma'asav Chaimish. Ma'asav Sheni into Shlamim, and now the Shlamim has to be redeemed. No, we view the Shlamim as the Ma'asav Sheni. Okay, so Amalei Rav Mana, the law, the Muya have Rebbe midamilo. Just to know, Rebbe refers to Rab Shmuel here. And Is he not comparing both dinim together the way we explained? He is. He's bringing them together. Ma'aser Sheni into Shlamim, Moisei Pesach into Shlamim. Don't give me Yudaf Mana, Yudaf Huna, your Gavaldike, it's beautiful what you're saying by Tamura. This whole Torah of Tamura is not Shaykh to Ma'aser Sheni, so therefore he rejects that understanding. Okay, and now we're starting today's new sugya, which is really huge. And I know we learned about this before. Now we're learning something amazing. Forget about the fifth, guys. Let me go back to this din. I have Ma'aser Sheni money. Again, we learned today the ideal usage of Ma'aser Sheni money in Yerushalmi is to buy a living animal as a carbon shlamim. Now, we also spoke about the fact this shlamim could become blemished. Yes, it could. When it becomes blemished, it has to be deconsecrated. Like any other kachim, you deconsecrate it onto money, and now the money is going to be used to buy another shlamim. But hold on. What kedusha does this money have? What do you mean by that? I began with Ma'aser Sheni. Until now, we always understood pshat that when I took Ma'aser Sheni money and I bought a shlamim with it, I didn't take away, how could I, the kedusha of Ma'aser Sheni? Not only is the animal imbued with kedushas Ma'aser Sheni, compounded on top of that, there's a new kedusha. Ein isur halal isur, isur moisev, it's chal. It's not a problem. If that were to be the case, if this animal is viewed as Ma'aser Sheni and Shlamim, if it has to be redeemed because it got a blemish, then the money is back both Ma'aser Sheni and Kachim. With many nafkaminas, obviously. Different rules, different standards. Says the Gemara Rabbi Ba, which is Rabbi Abba, in the name of Rabbi Chia, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Now we have to go with this girsa. You have to know the girsa is properly. That shlamim shalakacham bekesav meiser, the case, the normal case. You bought a carbon shlamim with Ma'aser Sheni money. And like we mentioned, humamu, it got blemished. And upadayin, and you redeemed it. Zakt b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, oid, einon chayzrin l'kamoi shahoyu lehei asay shenis. No longer will the money be Ma'aser Sheni. The Ma'aser Sheni kedusha is not here. You have money of shlamim only. Now, don't make away with that. You have money and it's kachim and you have to buy a carbon, but there is no kedushas Ma'aser Sheni at all on this money. Question is, how did that happen? How does it happen? When I have Ma'aser Sheni money and I buy produce onto money, it's Ma'aser Sheni kedusha. When I take the money in Yerushalmi, right, Aviv, and I buy a banana, the banana has kedushas Ma'aser Sheni. Why will it not have kedushas Ma'aser Sheni in addition to? It began with that. So there are two approaches. We'll learn today approach number one. We're going to learn, God willing, tomorrow approach number two. So Rab Ze'era and Rab Hila, both Tarvayon b'Shem Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina. So you have the typical. You have a Rebbe, Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. He explained it, and every Talmud heard a whole different Torah. When you hear the Torah of the Rebbe through us, who knows how far off we might be, or maybe we're both right. I know when Balak. The Rebbe had a team of people that would put his Torah down onto paper. He would speak on Shabbos Aviv in Yiddish, and they would put it onto paper in Yiddish. So there were groups of Israelis. When I was in the 80s, they decided why many people only spoke the Holy Tongue. Right? Reb Chaim Sholbrook, they made a whole chevra, Lashon Kodesh, Balak. And so two teams would write into the Rebbe the Fabrengen. Sometimes every team wrote a whole different sicha. And there was a time that there was a michlokes. It was beautiful. Shem Shamayim. Each one was claiming they're right. They were hoping that Rebbe would pick a side. The Rebbe told them, "Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chai." That's it. That's what we have over here. So Chadamar, one of the Talmidim say, that's what we're going to learn today. Oy Gewalt Slate. Shlamim shalakacham bekesav meiser. You know when the Kedusha of Ma'aser Sheni departed, not when you redeemed the animal back into money. No, from the beginning. The moment you took the Ma'aser Sheni money and you did the mitzvah, what was the mitzvah? To buy a carbon shlamim. At that moment, that carbon is no longer Ma'aser Sheni. The animal was never Ma'aser Sheni. When you use the money to buy the carbon, paka mehen kedushas ma'aser. And I'll tell you why it makes sense. Because the purpose for which you have to use the Ma'aser Sheni money for sure, ideally, is to buy a carbon shlamim. When you use something l'shem mitzvasai, that's it. I'll give you an example when it comes to me'ilah. A good example. Do you know that once the part of the animal was used for its mitzvah, remember that? There's no more me'ilah. The mitzvah was done. You know, they put the dam of the karbanis would go into the into the stream of water, and then why isn't that all hegdish? Well, Mishnah this because in other words, once you used something for its purpose, that's a logic. So since the purpose was to end up with the shlamim, the moment you bought the shlamim, there's no more kedushas ma'aser sheni. Just one line on top of chafei, and we'll stop over here. Truma shalakacha bekesev ma'aser. In contrast, I know we learned in the Mishnah Machloikis, but let's go with Rab Shimon that you are allowed to buy truma. If you bought truma with kesev ma'aser sheni, you know what that is? It's not only truma. Then it's both. You're right. Then that food is sai truma and sai ma'aser sheni. Then loy pakim imenu kedushas ma'aser. We'll stop over here to be continued.